Cleopatra is one of the most prominent rulers of ancient Egypt, famous not just for her beauty, but also for her love entanglement with two great Roman generals, Mark Antony and Julius Caesar. But the final resting place of Cleopatra has evaded archaeologists for thousands of years and remains a mystery. However, it appears a recent archaeological discovery could finally show us clues to the tombs of Cleopatra and Mark Antony. Join us as we explore how archaeologists uncover this artifact that could finally solve the puzzle about Cleopatra. Cleopatra was indeed one of the famous rulers of Egypt and was in fact the last sovereign ruler of the Egyptian Empire before it came under Roman rule after her death. She was a formidable ruler in her time and a brilliant politician in a time when women didn't hold many positions of power. In popular culture, it's depicted that Cleopatra was famous for her beauty and, of course, her affairs with Julius Caesar and marriage to Mark Antony, but in reality, her beauty wasn't even the strongest trait. Over the course of the last century, archaeologists have uncovered hundreds of tombs and burial sites, some of which belong to pharaohs from well over 4,000 years ago. Most of these pharaohs aren't nearly as famous or accomplished as Cleopatra herself, but somehow their tombs have been found, while the final resting place of Cleopatra remains a mystery. But a recent archaeological find in Egypt might hold clues to Cleopatra's tomb. An ancient tomb was discovered underneath of a temple in the ruined city of Taposiris Magna, 200 kilometers northwest of Cairo on the Egyptian coast. The tomb is more or less a vast underground tunnel which archaeologists have termed a geometric miracle for its sheer shape and symmetry. The tunnel was discovered 13 meters below the ground during active excavations of the temple site, and the tunnel itself measures about 2 meters tall, and over 1,300 meters of sandstone lines the walls. The team of archaeologists had spent nearly 20 years searching for the lost tomb of Cleopatra, and had been searching for clues in Taposiris Magna when the underground tunnel was discovered. Excavations near the site had yielded clues that could point to Cleopatra and Mark Antony, but nothing concrete had ever been found until now. The temple site is believed to be dedicated to the goddess Isis, which is striking as Cleopatra believed that she was the living incarnate of the goddess herself. Within the temple there were also ancient coins depicting the likeness of Cleopatra and another male who is believed to be Alexander the Great. Archaeologists reveal that over the years, burial shafts and makeshift tombs with Greco-Roman depictions have been found all around the temple. It is believed that if such burial shafts were to be found there, then it's possible that Cleopatra, who herself has strong Greek and Roman ties, could very well be buried there alongside her husband Mark Antony. But although Cleopatra had Roman ties, being married to a Roman general does not mean that she had the best relationship with Rome. In fact, it was Roman propaganda that portrayed the Egyptian queen as a temptress who used her exceptional beauty as a political weapon to seduce some of the most powerful men in the Roman Empire. But in truth, she was way more than just her looks. According to ancient texts, Cleopatra spoke as many as 12 different languages and had an exceptional understanding of mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, and oratory. Egyptian scholars have described the queen as someone who elevated scholars in ranks over aristocrats, as she even enjoyed the rich intellectual nature of their company. In modern culture, Cleopatra has been compared to Marilyn Monroe, who most people believe was simply famous for her beauty, but was actually very intelligent and would wow entire cabinets with her intellect. There's also been evidence that Cleopatra may not have been as beautiful or physically striking as she was believed to be. Ancient coins uncovered in Egypt have portrayed the Egyptian queen, showing her with rather more manly features. The coins depict Cleopatra as having a larger hooked nose, low eyebrows, and undefined cheekbones. Historians, however, have stated that Cleopatra intentionally commissioned these coins to appear more masculine as a show of strength to her empire and her enemies. In addition, the ancient Greek writer and philosopher Plutarch wrote that Cleopatra's looks weren't at all striking, but it was instead her eloquent speaking voice and irresistible charm that made her so desirable to many. Regardless of how she actually looked, if there was one thing the Queen of the Nile was known for, it was that she knew how to make an entrance. Cleopatra believed herself to be a goddess on earth, and would use grand unorthodox methods to stage an entrance to reinforce her divine status and woo potential military allies. An example of one such entrance was 48 BC, when she needed to meet with Julius Caesar, who was in Alexandria at the time. At the time, Cleopatra was in a heated feud with her brother Ptolemy the 13th over the throne, and knowing that he would do everything in his power to stop her from meeting the Roman general, she wrapped herself in a linen carpet and was smuggled into Caesar's personal quarters. Caesar was instantly dazzled by her entrance, and the pair soon became allies and lovers. Cleopatra also had a flair for the dramatic and employed one of her dramatic entrances during her first encounter with Mark Antony as well. When summoned to meet the Roman general in 41 BC, Cleopatra is said to have arrived on a golden ship that was covered with purple sails and rowed by oars that were made out of silver. Cleopatra was dressed to look like the goddess Aphrodite and sat beneath a decorated canopy while her servants, dressed as cupids, fanned her and burnt sweet-smelling incense. It was also said that she adorned the sails of the ship with her peculiar perfumes, such that Mark Antony would smell her long before he even saw her. Mark Antony, who considered himself the living embodiment of the Greek god Dionysus, was instantly won over by the queen. Archeologists over the years have found evidence of Cleopatra in areas around Rome, and many have speculated that she could possibly have been buried somewhere within the Roman Empire. But that theory has been contradicted because of one major fact. Cleopatra was actually living in Rome at the time of Julius Caesar's assassination. After their spectacular meetings in 48 BC, she then joined Caesar in Rome 2 years later, but as it turns out, her presence was not welcomed by other Roman aristocrats. Caesar was a very proud man and did not hide the fact that Cleopatra was his mistress and flaunted their love child Caesarion. Caesar was so proud that he even erected several gilded statues of Cleopatra in the temple of Venus Genetrix and around other parts of Rome. According to several historians, Cleopatra's presence was one of the major reasons behind Julius Caesar's assassination, as he was believed to be under the control of an Egyptian queen whom he was supposed to have subdued and conquered in the name of Rome. After Julius Caesar was stabbed to death in the Roman Senate in 44 BC, Cleopatra was forced to flee Rome with her son, but had already made a mark on the city. Her spectacular fashion sense and hairstyles became prominent throughout Rome long after her death. But while the burial site and final resting place of Cleopatra and Mark Antony still remains a mystery, the exact way in which she died is not quite clear as well. After returning to Alexandria and marrying Mark Antony, the couple had 3 children together, but then again it seemed that Rome had a thing against her. Her marriage to Mark Antony sparked wide controversy in Rome, and Mark Antony's political rival Octavian labeled him as a traitor to Rome who was under the control of the seductress who had brought Julius Caesar to his knees before fleeing Rome. Octavian's plot would prove effective when, in 32 BC, the Roman Senate labeled Cleopatra an enemy of the state and declared war against her. The war was brutal, as Cleopatra and Mark Antony's combined forces were no match for the might of the Roman Empire, and soon enough Octavian's forces were at the gates of Alexandria. As though she had anticipated her impending demise, Cleopatra had a mausoleum built for her months earlier in the hopes that she would be buried there. According to historians, upon hearing false reports that Cleopatra had died, Mark Antony stabbed himself with his own sword and died. Cleopatra, on the other hand, received a warning that Octavian had planned to take her and her children with him back to Rome as a trophy in order to show them off to the Roman Senate. Determined to die a queen and not a slave to the Romans, Cleopatra, alongside 2 handmaidens, locked herself away in her mausoleum. Before locking herself, she had sent a note to Octavian, who was already staying in the queen's palace at the time, asking him to bury her beside her husband. By the time Octavian's forces reached the mausoleum and broke through, Cleopatra and her 2 handmaidens had committed suicide and were already dead, and this is where history gets blurry. Seeing as how there were no living witnesses to give an account of how Cleopatra died, we've had to depend on widely repeated theories, with the most prevalent being the snake bite. According to some historians, the cause of the death for Cleopatra was a venomous snake bite either from an Egyptian cobra or an asp. The theory would be in line with Cleopatra's flair for the dramatic, as the cobra is commonly associated with the goddess Isis, whom Cleopatra favors, and the asp is a symbol of Egyptian royalty. But there are holes in this theory that are not in line with Cleopatra's personality or the circumstances of her death. Firstly, not all snake bites are deadly, and the deadly ones tend to give their victims a slow and painful death. Cleopatra is someone who typically would not subject herself to such a slow and painful death. And secondly, the effects of a snake bite would not have had enough time to render Cleopatra and her two maids lifeless in the short time that it took for Octavian to read her note and send his men to investigate. The next and most likely cause of death would be if Cleopatra had poisoned herself. Historians have commonly stated that Cleopatra was known to always carry a vial of potent poison attached to a pin comb in her hair. This would be the most likely cause of death, as it would be a lethal herbal concoction or toxic ointment of some kind that would ensure a swift but painless passing. This would be more swift and effective than a snake bite. Another mystery is if Cleopatra's death was truly even a suicide. This question arises because much of the account from the last day of her life comes from Octavian himself, and many have suggested that he could have just bent the truth to suit his own narrative. He definitely had enough motive to want her dead, as she would have been a constant threat to his rule in Egypt had she been left alive. But whether he ordered her death or simply provided her the means to do it herself, one thing is certain. Octavian did order his men to find and kill Caesarion, Cleopatra's son, with Julius Caesar, to remove any opposition that might arise to rule over him in Egypt. Octavian made himself emperor over Egypt, making it a Roman province, and made sure that his version of Cleopatra's death, the snakebite suicide, was the version that lived through the centuries. Many historians do still believe that Octavian might have honored Cleopatra's wish to be buried with her husband, but the location of their tombs still remains a mystery.